Welcome to the Edge of Abyss Corporation podcast. I am your host, Captain Temba Mapandazi. Each podcast will feature the exciting exploits of our Alliance crews in combat operations against criminal pirate cartels and the accursed slavery cultists of the Imperial Navy, all who dare to operate illegally in sovereign Minmatar space. The sound of the alarm klaxons jarred Trevor back to consciousness. Their throbbing pulse was in sync with the pain coming from his forehead. He blinked his eyes open through a warm, sticky red fog that he was immediately aware of as his own blood on the left side of his face. A head wound would bleed substantial amounts if not staunched quickly, but the fact that it was running down his face meant artificial gravity had not failed yet. The bridge of his frigate, the Instigator, was a disaster zone. Sparks and smoke danced freely upon most of the control surfaces. The first officer was no longer seated next to him. She was sprawled motionless on the deck with an unnatural angle in her spine. Her body was never meant to bend in that particular manner. The helmsman was still at her station, but one arm hung limp at her side as her other hand sped across the control surface trying to compensate for the incapacity. Sitting up straight and wiping the blood from his eyes, Trevor heard a voice requesting damage reports from all departments, then realized it was his voice. Calm and steady as if they had just left dry dock, somewhere in the back of his mind he marveled at how well his training was serving him. That same training might be the only thing to save what was ever left of his crew. Regardless of the peril of a situation, a command officer never allows it to infiltrate into his voice. Crew members in desperate situations needed the reassurance that a calm voice from their commander could interject into the most dire circumstances. The reports started to flow and Trevor switched off the audio alarms, and the strobing emergency lights reduced their rate automatically. Throughout the ship, all crew knew that meant the situation was being handled by the bridge crew, that some of them must have survived the final pounding that they had suffered before destroying the Dragoon destroyer they had engaged at close range. Frigate versus destroyer is a dicey encounter under the best of circumstances, but they had warped in on top of this slavery cultist and tackled it before it could even recall its flight of combat drones. Speed had become their best friend as they spiraled tightly around the heavier armed and armored destroyer while emitting proximity blast damage from their smart bombs that chewed away at first the shields, then armor, and finally the bare hull of their larger opponent. Fortunately, the proximity blast damage being inflicted on the Dragoon also did much more damage rapidly to its flight of far more vulnerable combat drones when they returned to target the Instigator. Ensign Adria Jaguar was a naturally gifted pilot with ice water in her veins and reactions quicker than the cat from which her family had drawn the surname she carried. The vast majority of the devastating damage the Dragoon sent in volley after lethal volley towards them was avoided by superb piloting that never gave the Dragoon laser and missile crews a good target to hit. Nonetheless, the vastly outmatched frigate still took a horrible beating from the 3 flights of drones carried within the destroyer before they were obliterated by the smart bombs. The intermittent hits from the Dragoon's main weapons turrets inflicted an increasingly devastating toll. At the end, it had been a very close thing. They had been totally peeled of their shields and armor, and were taking damage directly to their bare hull by the time they finally blasted the Dragoon and most of its slavery cultist crew to the hell they deserved. Ironically, the final volley from the Dragoon had struck close to the bridge and had severely, if only momentarily, impacted the ability of the Instigator to fight back. Captain Trevor Ronan had once again cheated death by his willingness to dance between the jaws of a target larger and more heavily armed than his own vessel. Trevor was proud of his crew and they all had performed flawlessly. Being commanded to attack a vessel that by all rights should defeat you is a test of the crew's belief in each other and their confidence in their captain's tactical ability to engage enemy vessels in such a way as to always escape with a victory. The broken hull of the Dragoon destroyer was now a pile of scrap. The once deadly vessel drifted as a few remaining escape pods jettisoned survivors into the cold blackness of space. The captain of the Dragoon destroyer, Jenneth Dafiti, was fuming. He could not accept that a solo frigate had literally flown rings around his ship while applying devastating damage that struck home with each volley. Smart bombs are an area of effect weapon that inflict a specific amount and type of damage to anything within their range, and that cursed Minmatar frigate had stuck to them like a ravenous flea. His greater firepower had been evaded by the speed and the close range of the attacking frigate. At the very start of the engagement, Jenneth had already deployed his drones to attack another target at maximum range, and the time delay for them to return to engage in the defense of the Dragoon had proven pivotal. If he had abandoned the flight of drones, he would have had immediate support by launching a second flight from the drone bay, but he would have effectively reduced by 1/3 his most efficient counter to fast-moving targets like frigates, something he assumed the frigate commander was counting on. It had proven to be a wrong assumption. Replaying the fight in his mind, Jenneth now appreciated that the frigate commander had accounted for his Dragoon's full damage-dealing capabilities and had bet it all on being able to survive just long enough to secure a kill. It had taken some extremely skilled piloting, but a good commander knows the skills of his crew. Jenneth winced and almost doubled over in pain. Around him floated bright red orbs, his own blood gushing from a wound that ripped him from collar bone to hip.
The bridge had been smashed almost beyond recognition, and as his vision narrowed to a darkening tunnel, Jenneth knew his end was near. Had the convoy of supply ships he attacked been bait? Was their purpose to get an attacker to deploy drones, and thus reduce their available flights for defense? To get them to linger just long enough to be tackled and webbed by a fast-moving ambusher? Jenneth knew now in retrospect he had made an error by not warping out when the solo frigate landed on top of them and immediately employed smart bombs while trying to tackle him. He had mused aloud to his crew that if this was the best defense the convoy could summon, they had simply added to the kills he would have painted on the hull. Midway through the fight, his executive officer had pulled up the public kill record of the attacking frigate. Shockingly, it indicated 23 solo destroyer kills. He was dealing with a specialist. By that time, escape was not possible. They were locked in a death match from which at best only one would emerge. There was no support in range that could arrive in time. It was do or die. It was then he ordered the crews to overheat their weapons, but it had been too late. He failed at the do part. All that was left to him was to die. Death took him at that very moment. Captain, the supply convoy is requesting permission to join in salvage and repair operations. Ensign Douglas Spad always spoke in quick bursts of words, as if his tongue had difficulty keeping up with his mind. Spad was the sensor and communications officer, and he looked as battered as the rest of the bridge crew. The right sleeve of his tunic was burned away, and the skin beneath it had suffered at least first-degree burns from his knuckles to his shoulder. Two corpsmen entered the bridge, rushing about with stern neutral expressions held in place on their faces, and quickly the smell of ozone, smoke, and burnt flesh was being challenged by stringent aromas of antiseptics and medicinal salves. Signal them to approach and to deploy full medical teams. We are going to need assistance before we jump out of this system. Aye, sir. They are inbound with the mobile depot so we can swap out our more severely damaged modules. Deploy our salvage drone. I do not want to encourage any random pirate passing by to think that destroyer wreck is fair game. Aye, sir. Drone deployed and salvaging has begun. Ensign Jaguar, will you be able to keep us in a fast tight orbit until a replacement helmsman can relieve you? Aye, Captain. My other arm hurts like hell if I try to move it, but I can keep us moving as you direct until we settle out what needs crewing first to replace losses. As they spoke, a corpsman ran a quick scan of Jaguar, gave her a shot of something, probably for alertness, because Trevor noticed her entire body shook for the briefest of moments, and her posture straightened. Pain was part of being on duty. Absent life-threatening injury on duty, crew in engineering, weapons control, and the bridge were never administered pain shots that might slow their reaction time without the prior approval of the captain. By the time the Instigator was able to warp back to its home base in Krillmokanur, its shields had been restored to full strength and its propulsion was putting out 80% of their normal levels. The repair crews had done a fast job. Lingering around a kill zone with a weakened ship is never a good idea. The escape pods of the enemy crew were all transmitting homing beacons to any friendly warships that might respond, and since almost all of them would be larger than the Instigator, leaving the theater of combat operations once the combat operation had been concluded was the always first order of business. Just as soon as the destroyer was salvaged, the Instigator and the supply fleet jumped to a safer position far deeper in the system and out of direct scanning range of ships entering the system via any of the three that jump gates. Using the mobile depot, the first module they swapped in was a cloaking module that would allow even a crippled ship to hide effectively. Medical personnel poured into the Instigator, too late for some but just in time for more. 8 fatalities and 12 unfit for active duty was the price in flesh and bone the Instigator had been forced to pay to claim victory today. The patchwork of field repairs that welded new unpainted metal to painted, scorched, and gouged sections gave the entire ship a second-hand and fragile appearance, even for a Minmatar vessel, which were not exactly known for their aesthetic appeal. Trevor stood on the dock watching the repair crews scramble all over the hull of the Instigator. It would be a solid week before she was fit to ship out again. Trevor felt lucky he had the financial support of a Capsuleer Alliance behind him, unlike so many other Minmatar.
Thanks for listening to the Edge of Abyss Corporation podcast. If you would like to hear the next episode, please click on the subscribe icon. If you like this episode, click on the like button. Click on the notifications bell to make sure you do not miss future episodes. Our thanks to Crowd Control Productions for inventing the EVE Online sandbox we base all our activities upon. You can play EVE Online for free. Without question, one of the longest-lasting, well-designed, player-centric, massive multiplayer games ever presented to a worldwide audience. When you do join EVE Online for free, join us for future combat operations against the inhumane slavery cultists of the Imperial Navy and the criminal pirate cartels operating in sovereign Minmatar Republic space. Join Edge of Abyss. Fly with the best. Death to the rest.